Today is January 27, 2018, and we will be continuing on with the testimony called Experience Not Reliable by Ellen White, published in Volume 3 of the Testimonies, starting on page 67. Before we get back into that, let us ask our Heavenly Family to guide us. Heavenly Family, once again, thank you for guiding us to this most important topic. Please help us to understand it, help us to deal with the implications, and to harmonize our lives to the truth that we are learning. Please help us to change the world for the better and to apply all that we learn to every aspect of life. Thank you so much. We ask this b'shem tzemach, in the name of Branch. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so I'll briefly mention what we're talking about and why, and then, as I mentioned at the end of last night's call, we will start with comments and questions, if anyone has any, that is. And if no one really does, then we will continue on. So, as I've already mentioned, we have been going through a testimony written by Ellen White called Experience Not Reliable, which is found in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 3. And it starts on page 67 and ends on page 79. It's a very, very important testimony, and what it deals with is the difference between true and false experience. It characterizes false experience as being habit or indulgence that is thoughtlessly and often ignorantly followed. It characterizes false experience as essentially being what most people term experience. In fact, it says that several times. Most people refer to circumstances through which they pass and their internalization of those circumstances as being experience. Ellen White says that that type of experience is not genuine experience and that it is not reliable. Conversely, genuine experience is characterized as being knowledge derived from a variety of careful experiments. She emphasizes in this testimony the need for actual experiments with a knowledge of the principle involved in the action, with no biases, with an earnest desire to learn and to improve on every point. And she also characterizes true experience or genuine experience as being in harmony with the laws of nature and also science. The setting of this testimony is that there was a woman who was depending upon her own experience when it comes to her health and was choosing to do and not do certain things based upon her experience. And Ellen White was counseling this woman not to depend on her own experience, but to yield her experience in order to follow the counsel given by trained physicians who had what Ellen White considered genuine experience. That being an understanding of the various parts of the body and of disease and how to treat disease. And they gained that understanding by means of scientific experiment, and thus their counsel was more reliable than this woman's own experience. So Ellen White wrote her on this subject, and in doing so brought to light many very important principles and published this for all in order that everyone reading this testimony may gain an understanding of these principles and examine themselves to see whether they are living up to those principles or whether they are living contrary to them. One of our primary reasons for going through this testimony is that most branches have not been in the habit of living according to these principles. The same is true of Davidians, Adventists, and even religious people as a whole. But of course, we want to emphasize it for ourselves. We've seen that Ellen White's counsel here is firmly rooted in materialism, the philosophical position that all which exists is indeed material. And that led her to have a positive view of science and a negative view of individual experience due to its subjective nature, whereas science has the advantage of being more objective and being more rigorous and experimental and falsifiable and verifiable, and we can go on with the advantages of science. Anyway, I think we've been having some great meetings concerning this testimony so far, and I'm sure that they will continue to be until we are done with the testimony. So, all that said, you know what, actually before opening it up for questions and comments, I just want to mention again that one of the points that we want to focus on in this series is science. Particularly because most people in the branch and in broader people groups tend to have at least a certain degree of negativity towards science. And that negativity is ill-founded, and it is something upon which we need correction. And that's one of the purposes of going through this testimony. So, does anyone have any comments or questions on this topic of experience not reliable? And if nobody voices any comments or questions within the next 10 seconds, then we will continue on.
Yeah, Trent, you gave us the links to Harriet Hall, right? And basically you use her for us to listen to because she has lectures promoting the principles behind science-based medicine, which is great, right? However, would we also be careful to take for granted that she is up to date with certain individual cases that she posts critiques about? What's your thought on that?
I don't actually understand what you're saying, so maybe you could try again.
Okay. Harriet Hall is one of the links that you gave us to listen to with regards to understanding the principles behind science-based medicine, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So if one goes through her website, she posts a lot of topics on different subjects like essential oils, a lot of things on alternative medicine. And she critiques, based on her evaluations and her research on the data. So I was just thinking that we should also make sure that her information is correct by double checking her information. So in other words, I'm just saying that yes, she does have the right principles that will get us to understand the principles behind science-based medicine. However, I was thinking that the certain information that she posts with specific topics of alternative medicine, we should double check to see if she's got up-to-date information. Is that any clearer?
So, yeah, that's a lot clearer. I understand what you're saying for sure. It's interesting how you put it, because it's almost like you're thinking, oh, well, yeah, what she has to say in terms of the principles of science-based medicine may be good, but maybe some of the specifics not so much. I wouldn't necessarily characterize it in that way. What she says concerning the specific issues is at least generally in agreement with what other advocates of science-based medicine would say. So I don't think that it's necessarily different how we would view what she says about the principles of science-based medicine versus specific things. In terms of checking things out, we need to do that with everything. The principles advocated, whether by her, by me, or by anyone else, or specifics in regard to whatever. But I think that her critiques of alternative medicine are very valuable and should be taken seriously, as should the critiques produced by others who are part of the Society for Science-Based Medicine. And, everything needs to be checked to see if it's the most up-to-date, but I would say that she is more likely to have up-to-date, accurate information than any of us on the call right now, which is why I pointed to her, and also just the Society for Science-Based Medicine in general, as a good resource to go to find accurate information. Does that help to answer your question, or do you have any kind of follow-up questions in relation to that?
Yeah, no, I was just informed of one thing. I haven't checked it out, but something about her critiquing a certain topic, and she actually apologizes after, because I guess some researchers notified her that her information was not correct or up to date, so that leads me to think that, okay, well, she too can make flaws, of course, like everybody else, right? So just a heads up kind of thing.
Well, sure. Science is a self-correcting process, and there's always going to be more information that will correct and refine. And just like with present truth in every generation, there's always going to be, the message is always going to be true, but there's always going to be things which will be stated less accurately than they could and stated in light of the best available information at the time. And so always the most up-to-date information is the best because it's simply the best at the present time. So that's always good to keep in mind. And yeah, whenever we're looking at something from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it may be, whenever it's in regard to anything, whether it's health or science in general or whatever, we always need to keep in mind that, hey, there might be elements of this that further information has refined or corrected or whatever. Same thing with present information. We have to keep in mind that the most up-to-date information is subject to future refinement, correction, and so on. So in science, conclusions are usually provisional, but I do have to qualify that to say that there are certain things that become so well established by an abundance of evidence that it is very highly unlikely that that will ever turn out to be wrong. So that's just to keep in mind. Certain things are established more so, certain things are established less so. Generally speaking, though, the Society for Science-Based Medicine and the people involved with it, including Harriet Hall, are probably some of the best resources available in terms of health and medicine.
I just have another question. You've given us also links to, the Cochrane Research Institute or whatever that is, right? And there's a few of them. Now, there's other ones that I've found, like American Medical Journal, and there's another one I can't remember. But what kind of factors should we look at when we're looking at these research institutes? Would you know, or can you give us some idea of what to look into, like whether they're not good resources to look into?
That's an excellent question. So there are a lot of different resources. There are lots of public access journals and things like that. There's PubMed. I'm trying to think of some of the other popular ones. There's a few ones out there. And those can all be useful resources, just like Cochrane. The Cochrane Library and the Cochrane Review are both very useful resources. In terms of what to look at, like even Wikipedia, for example, can be a useful resource, but we just have to understand the limits of resources as we use them and how to use them best. So in order to do that, you have to know the nature of the resource. So let's just take Wikipedia as an example. Wikipedia is a public, online, editable encyclopedia, which has contributors who are varied in scope, hugely, more than any other encyclopedia. And people can edit Wikipedia pages freely, which has its pros and its cons. People are lively updating Wikipedia pages, and you can then have very up-to-date information. Rather than a published encyclopedia, it's not going to be able to keep up-to-date as rapidly. But by virtue of the fact that people can kind of put whatever they want on there, it does not always have the most accurate information. So that's just something that you have to keep in mind when using Wikipedia. So Wikipedia has a bunch of information, so you can use it, but what you really want to find is information that is footnoted, and then hopefully there will be hyperlinked footnotes where you can go and read the sources that were used to create the Wikipedia page. So that's kind of the way to use Wikipedia responsibly, is to not just read it and think that what it says is automatically factual, but to realize that it has its drawbacks, but it's also very beneficial, and so just make sure to verify what it's saying. Another type of resource may be used in different ways. The Cochrane Library, for instance, is a collection of just almost innumerable studies. I mean, there's just tons of studies, same as PubMed, or if it's called ePubMed, maybe ePubMed, I forget. Anyway, there's a lot of these websites that have just tons of studies published on them. So that's a good way to come across studies. But we understand that studies have their limits. And actually, in the The last link that I posted within the comments for links related to last night's call, it's a talk by Steve Novella, who's the founder of Science-Based Medicine. And in the talk, he explains briefly what he and others found in several studies of scientific literature, that over 50% of studies published in scientific journals find the wrong conclusion. In other words, the conclusion of the study is incorrect. And the reason why is because essentially it usually takes 5 to 20 years in order to really sort out an issue, to really come to a final conclusion with enough evidence. So let's say at the beginning of that 20-year process, people are publishing studies and it's just preliminary research. A lot of that is going to be incorrect. And then by the end of it, you come to the right conclusion because you have really definitive studies. Because as you're doing studies, you learn what techniques and what methods actually work in testing the particular thing that you're testing and what things don't work. So through these studies, it's really a lot of trial and error, doing things that don't really work as a valid test, doing things that do work, and then you have to expand that and you have to refine it. And it can take, again, like 5 to 10 to 20 years in order to really figure out how to do really definitive studies on an issue. And so if someone's just searching through and finding studies and you don't really have the studies placed in their proper context and you're just going off early preliminary studies on something, chances are you're going to come to the wrong conclusion because the majority of studies published do come to the wrong conclusion. But again, the purpose of this whole thing is that science is a self-correcting process and it's part of the experiment. So you just always have to keep that sort of thing in mind in using any sort of resource like Cochrane Library and the Cochrane Review. Those are wonderful resources, but you shouldn't just go on Cochrane Library and think like, oh, this is a recommended resource, so any study I find on here is going to be giving me the right conclusion. No, it's just that's the database that we have to analyze. Cochrane Library is a huge database. There are others, and the one that you mentioned may be a fine database to work from. When you're looking at journals, it's good to read from the journal their outlook and their methods and how they choose what they will accept for publication and what they won't. So you have to kind of learn about just a little bit about each journal, and same thing kind of like with Bible translations. In order to know what each Bible translation will be most useful for, you want to read the introduction by the translators where they explain their methodology for their translation. Are they trying to accomplish something that's very interpretive but yet understandable for modern readers? Or are they trying to give you a word-for-word translation of the Hebrew texts and the Greek texts? What manuscripts are they using? You know, those sorts of issues will let you know how to go about using that Bible translation. It's the same thing for a journal or for an online resource, which is a collection of studies. It will show you how to use it. And actually, I'm going to use your question to explain something else that I wanted to explain, since it kind of ties into it, and then I'll check back with you to see if you have any follow-up comments or questions. So one of the things that I wanted to explain is that too often people categorize things incorrectly, as of course we've found with many topics as we've studied this message. But the same is true when it comes to health. People often think that you have two categories. you have alternative medicine, and you have mainstream medicine. And so, since we're, speaking negatively of alternative medicine, then we must be just fully advocating so-called mainstream medicine. That's not quite the case. In fact, I really don't think that categorizing things just with those two categories is helpful. I really do not think that it is helpful. I think that far more accurately, we would have to use at least 4 categories, and I'm not even saying that this is the best way to categorize things, but it is at least a better way. So, within what we might call alternative medicine, let's kind of divide that into 2 categories. Let's just say we have folk medicine. Folk medicine is just traditional medicine that has been passed down through generations, using a certain herb for a certain thing, and you have traditional Chinese medicine, you have traditional Native American medicine, whatever. There's traditional medicine of all sorts. That's just simply folk medicine. It's medicine from the pre-scientific age, like Dark Age medicine, whatever, folk medicine. And then there's pseudoscientific medicine. This is different from folk medicine. However, most times people just refer to them both as alternative medicine. Pseudoscientific medicine is medicine which puts itself forward as being scientific, which uses scientific terms, which may conduct studies relative to its products, and, thus it appears to be scientific, yet fails to actually use scientific methodology and rigor. So, like, modern homeopathy is pseudoscientific. It is not folk medicine. Homeopathy has not been around for that long. It hasn't been passed down the generations. It's relatively new, and people try to promote it by giving scientific explanations, or at least scientific sounding explanations, using words like frequency and so on. Modern energy healing is pseudoscientific. Again, it's not folk medicine. It's relatively modern, although in principle it has a lot of connections with more ancient folk medicines. But it is explained using scientific terms. People talk about energy, although under a totally different definition than how the word energy is actually used in science. And, you get the idea though. These things are different, folk medicine and pseudoscientific medicine. Both of them are usually referred to simply as alternative medicine, but they are 2 different things, both of which are not legitimate. Then there is what is called evidence-based medicine. Out of the 4 categories that I'm giving now, this third one, evidence-based medicine, is the one which is probably most accurately described as being mainstream medicine. Evidence-based medicine is worlds of improvement ahead of pseudoscientific medicine and folk medicine. Evidence-based medicine is a good thing. And like the Cochrane Library and Cochrane Review is really a major institution for evidence-based medicine. Most mainstream medicine is evidence-based medicine. What the video that I shared by Steve Notley, that's another person, Steve Novella, that video that I posted, he really explains how we really do need to go beyond evidence-based medicine, because what has been typically referred to as evidence-based medicine is really insufficient to really give us the best medicine that we can have. And the reason for this is that evidence-based medicine is too narrow in its focus and does not take into account all that really needs to be taken into account. So evidence-based medicine will just say, well, let's just do a study on this. And you can do a study on something that is totally impossible to even exist, something that is spiritualistic in its idea. And you could end up, by chance, in this study having positive results. Because that happens. I mean, studies are always a small sample size in comparison to the world of experience. And so, of course, every once in a while you will end up having some sort of positive studies unless your study is very, very well thought through and set up. In any case, you could have things that appear to be evidence for things that don't even exist. So there are studies that have been conducted that seem to indicate positive results for homeopathy. There's not that many, and they're not very well conducted, but there are studies out there. And so with evidence-based medicine, you could, think, oh, well, there are some studies which seem to indicate some sort of benefit, so therefore we should research this more. And that's what tends to happen in evidence-based medicine. Things which are actually, they just simply cannot be legitimate. They actually contradict the laws of physics and different things like that. It ends up happening that more money and more time and more effort gets put into studying these things when really there shouldn't be. There's other things that are more likely to be effective that should be studied. So science-based medicine goes beyond that. So that's the fourth category, science-based medicine, which really takes into account all of the finds of science and considers it very important that the conclusions that are drawn must be in harmony with every find of science, rather than just saying, what might this be, and let's do a study on this. In order to actually study something, because there is limited money, there are limited resources, and we have limited time to fight disease. So science-based medicine says, okay, let us consider if something has prior probability in order to actually spend the money and the time on doing a study on this. So something has to actually be plausible in terms of what science says generally. If it's not even plausible, then why do that? By the way, we do the same sort of thing in figuring out what to study on the calls. When we study the Dead Sea Scrolls, they have a high prior probability for containing some important information. When we look at the Corinthian recognitions or the Apocryphon of James or whatever, those have good prior probability rather than us spending time to investigate every single text out there, because there's thousands, as you guys know. Rather than us doing that on the call and checking out every single text, they need to be evaluated to see which texts among these have the greatest initial potential for being authentic and valid and containing genuine messages. So that's what science-based medicine is suggesting, that, hey, look, we have to start somewhere. There's millions of things that we could be studying, and we could be pumping billions of dollars in every direction and get nowhere unless we have some guidance, and science provides that guidance, because there's already a huge amount of scientific knowledge that has accumulated over the past couple centuries. So let's use that. And it's not just about finding out what to study. Science-based medicine also uses the finds of science generally to inform how to go about doing studies, how to go about analyzing studies. It really just uses science for every stage of the medical process. That is above and beyond what evidence-based medicine does. And that's really where mainstream medicine isn't up to speed, because mainstream medicine is primarily evidence-based medicine. If I remember correctly, about 70% of mainstream medicine is actually scientifically validated. Like it is as good as science-based for about 70%, which is way, way better than alternative medicine. It's way, way better than folk remedies and pseudoscientific medicine. But even when we talk about mainstream medicine, that concept is becoming a little bit harder to define because pseudoscience and other forms of alternative medicine are becoming just as much mainstream. I mean, what do we call mainstream? There are individuals who are very, very popular. One of the most popular doctors, maybe the most popular, is Dr. Oz. And he promotes lots of pseudoscience and alternative medicine, and Time magazine ranked him as one of the 100 most influential people in 2008. And Esquire magazine placed him on the list of the 75 most influential people of the 21st century. He's clearly like very well-known and popular, and it might be fair to call him mainstream, and what he promotes a lot of people follow, and it is, again, what Victor Hodoff would call quackery. It's really not science-based medicine. It's not even evidence-based medicine, and yet it might be classified as mainstream medicine. There are major hospitals now that are using pseudoscience in their hospitals. You have complementary and alternative medicine departments in hospitals now. And at hospitals, you have things like healing touch therapy, where someone's laying there and a physician is just barely touching their skin, and and things like that. That is a form of so-called energy healing, which is a spiritualistic form of practice. And yet this has entered into major hospitals and medical institutions and so on. So what we call mainstream now isn't always even evidence-based medicine. And so the lines are blurred, and what we are advocating is science-based medicine. Mainstream medicine is way better than alternative medicine because it's at least regulated and there are standards, but it too is also polluted. Science-based medicine is the best that we have. And it's not to say that everything that is found in science-based medicine is immutable. No, far from it. But science-based medicine has the advantage of being self-correcting. And it is the place where we will find the best up-to-date information, but we have to keep up with it. So anyway, I hope that that's helpful for everyone, for me to kind of broaden our categories. Anyway, I hope that helps answer your question on how to use resources, Anna, and beyond. Do you have any other comments or questions in relation to any of that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of how to formulate another question. So some of the science-based medicine researchers I was looking up a while ago. Okay, so they include testing by animals, right, as well as human beings. So what's our stance on, well, I guess, just trying to think if it's even a good question. I was going to say, what's our stance on that with the animals? But then it's like, okay, well, they test on humans too, and humans we value more than an animal, right? So, anyway, if you have a comment on that, if you...
Yeah, I do have a comment on that, yeah. Okay, so first I'll just say that humans are animals, and I know that you know that, we've talked about that before, but it's just, I always want to keep that at the forefront of our attention so that we don't continue with the paradigm of thinking that animals and humans are different from each other. So let's just remember that humans are animals. Not all testing on animals is ethical, whether we're talking humans or otherwise. And there have definitely been animal tests which have been unethical. However, science-based medicine has the highest ethical guidelines in comparison to other forms of medicine. We'd always have to check to find out if something's being done legitimately or not, or are there animals that are being hurt or suffering or whatever in certain tests. And, obviously we do not promote suffering. We do not promote for people to injure animals of any sort, really. So basically, when it comes to something like that, though, what stance we should take is one thing, and what we should do about it is another thing, and they should go together, really. So in other words, I'm trying to say that it would be kind of fruitless to try and figure out a stance on that if we're not going to do anything about it. And as it presently is, whether studies are being done ethically or not is an important issue. But what is learned from those studies is also an important issue. And valid information can be gained through unethical studies. Now, it shouldn't be that people should do unethical studies, of course, but I just wanted to kind of separate those two issues just to say, even if things are being done unethically, real information could come out of that. And so we should still take the information as legitimate, even if people were doing it unethically. But definitely we shouldn't promote for people to conduct studies which cause animal suffering. And not every animal study does, by the way. Like, there are studies that are done on animals that don't cause any suffering. And in fact, some of them may even cause great joy to the animals. But, when it comes to animals versus people, even that, maybe it's not best to refer to animals as not being people. Maybe some animals are people. That's something to consider anyway. In any case, one of the issues is that when we are dealing with other human beings, we have a far higher amount of communication than between human beings and other animals. And so it's easier to be certain, at least in some circumstances, whether a study is ethical, because you can have vocalized and written consent and voluntary participation, and everyone knows it's voluntary when it comes to another human being. And if they simply volunteer for this study and they want to be a part of it and so on, with other animals it becomes more complicated because of the lack of communication. And so anyway, I guess we'd have to get into specifics to really analyze where the lines are to be drawn and so on. So anyway, that's my comment.
Okay, if nobody else has a question, I have another one. It's Ananite. Sorry. Okay, essential oils. Do we have anything to say about those in terms of, are they considered alternative medicine?
So far as I know, yes. I don't think that essential oils are used in so-called mainstream medicine or evidence-based medicine or science-based medicine or anything like that. again, you have to go and see what scientific research has been done, if any, on whatever essential oils. I do know that when it comes to essential oils, there is a lot of pseudoscience. Like, there are a lot of, like, they're used for so-called energy healing and all these different things. Like, there's a lot of pseudoscientific claims regarding essential oils. Whether any of them have any actual health benefit is something worth investigating. And what I would recommend on that is check out the Science-Based Medicine blog and check out they have a bunch of other blogs and websites, resources, online resources, and so on, linked to from the Science-Based Medicine blog. There's another guy by the name of Edzard Ernst who used to promote complementary and alternative medicine and actually had a position to study it, and the people who gave him the position were expecting him to find things to legitimize complementary and alternative medicine, and perhaps that's what he thought he was going to do as well. But in doing research on these medicines, he found that they're really not legitimate, and he ended up going on to become a real doctor and so on. And he's spent a lifetime really studying complementary and alternative medicine and running very rigorous scientific experiments and so on. I think he's published over 600 papers in scientific journals regarding complementary and alternative medicine. So he very well may have done research on essential oils, and I'm sure others have as well. So I think you can probably find stuff on that. Some of the essential oils smell very good, so that's but that's, of course, a separate issue from whether they have any actual healing properties. So again, what I would say when it comes to that, or really any other specific question, is if there is real scientific legitimacy to it, and it's been clearly evidenced to be scientifically valid, then we should advocate it. Anything short of that means that we should not advocate it for others or use it for ourselves. That's what I would say in regard to any specific product or any specific category of products or type of treatment or whatever. So hopefully that helps.
So basically, I just want to finish this essential oils thing, Leroy. So basically, if you just want to smell like cedar oil today or something, that's not a big issue. But to claim that cedar oil treats some type of malady is a different issue, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. If someone wants to eat their orange seeds, let's say, they're going to eat their orange and they're going to eat their orange seeds just because they like it, go for it. If it's, so long as it's not harmful, that is, go for it. That's fine. But if you're going to claim that eating your orange seeds is going to cure cancer, that's an issue, or even just thinking it, even if you're not claiming it and vocally putting it out there to others, even just holding that perspective yourself is not good either, unless you actually have real proof that that is the case, because then what's going to happen when you get cancer and you start eating all your orange seeds thinking that you're going to be healed, and what if you're not, So, yeah, absolutely. Like, if someone just wants to use essential oils every once in a while to smell good, that's fine, so long as it's not harming anything or anyone, and it may not be. All right, or Teresa said, or to ward off bugs because they're so strong. Yeah, that can be done too. That's totally fine. So it just depends on what claim we make and how we actually think of it. So yeah.
Thanks.
Just the name essential is kind of promoting them as they're essential. You know, we gotta have. Trent mentioned the name of somebody a little while ago that had done a lot of writings on different things, and I didn't hear it very good.
Yeah, his name is Edzard Ernst. That's Edzard, Edzard, and then last name is Ernst, Ernst.
All right. Now my question. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say on the other issue, essential oils, while it may have the effect, someone may interpret the phrase as saying that you gotta have it, like this is essential. That's not actually what the word essential means in that context. If I understand correctly, it has to do with getting the essence of whatever it is. So essential oil of peppermint is capturing the essence of peppermint in its oils. So, yeah, just wanted to mention that.
Thank you.
So what's your question?
My question was sort of along with Anna's question, is Sister White the latest word? How about Brother Houdup and Ben Roden, the books we call it, Entering Wedge books, promoting natural things. But anyway, I thought that was interesting. But after the meeting, I Googled, is modern medicine science-based? And that was a pretty interesting thing to read about. There was a Dr. Dana Ullman, and he's called Mr. Homeopathy, but he was giving kind of the science or the what is known about the big billion-dollar drug companies and how they use doctors for consultants and to promote their industry. And even though his homeopathy, his study was his things he said was pretty interesting when he gave studies about what he was talking about. But anyway,
so to comment on that, I just want to say I honestly would not put much weight in what was said by that individual, just because if the question is modern medicine science-based? And the answer is getting into the supposed politics of drug companies, then that's not the way an answer should be given. If you want to evaluate whether it's science-based, then you have to evaluate the science. This is the problem that is so prevalent with people in present truth and in past truth. When it comes to some of these issues, people are allowing their biases, whether political or whatever, to influence how they view another thing. And we really shouldn't do that. And so I would highly recommend, if you want to find out whether something is science-based or not, then you have to learn something about science. That's the only way that you will be able to see whether something is actually based on science. And if you're looking for an answer on that and someone's getting into politics or someone's getting into whatever else, then know that that's not giving you the answer that you need.
Right. Now that was just a small part of what he had to say. He was giving statistics on different things, but too many for me to, but it was interesting anyway. But I'm really appreciating our meeting tonight because it sounded to me like we were promoting science-based medicine over natural medicines, So I'm glad you gave the different categories.
Remember, though, that, as we've said on the calls before, there is no such thing as a distinction between natural medicine and some other medicine. That's not a valid distinction. People usually think, oh, natural medicine is whatever, this stuff that we call natural and label as natural. And this other stuff, like drugs from drug companies, is not natural. Well, what do we mean? That doesn't even make sense. What do we mean that it's not natural? It could mean at least one of two things. Either that it's not part of the natural world, or that it has been altered by man. Again, either meaning is ultimately nonsensical.
Amen.
In order for something to be natural, it's part of the natural world. Okay, if we're talking about something being altered by man, why does man altering something all of a sudden make it supposedly unnatural? When a bee alters something, it doesn't make it unnatural. When a tree alters something, it doesn't make it unnatural. When a wolf alters something, or any other animal, any other part of the world, when anything's altered by anything else, we don't call it unnatural. Only when humans do it. But we are part of the natural world. We are animals. We are part of the physical universe, part of the natural world, just as much and just like anything else. So us altering something does not make it unnatural at all. Let's just take an essential oil. Okay, essential oils do not occur as essential oils growing off trees or something like that. That has to be altered by man in order to have that. That's just the way it is. A loaf of bread does not grow in a field. It has to be altered by man in order to get that. And yet we don't call essential oils and bread unnatural. People divide the world according to biases rather than according to reality. There is no thing out there that is so-called man-made that is not ultimately taken from things that already exist in the natural world. It's just altering things by means of combination and removal of, you remove parts, you combine parts, and that's basically what you're doing. Removing certain things from a combination and adding certain things to a combination, changing the ratios, mixing things in a certain way, whatever, that's all that's happening. And every part of the natural world is doing that already. So for us to do that is the most natural thing that we can do. And for us to do it with intelligence, with design in mind, I would say is better than just doing it with less precision and in a more haphazard way. And so, yeah, really, we shouldn't think of drugs and things that are produced in laboratories and things like that as being somehow unnatural. No, it's just us doing what humans do with precision. What could be more natural than that? So, anyway.
Amen. Thank you. Anyway, my choice of words is not the best for what I'm trying to say. Anyway, my experience has been, from the people I've grown up with and talked to, that don't trust doctors. They're telling people what their drugs, and trust these natural remedies, which, are ones that are not part of that system. So, anyway, I'm learning a lot, so I appreciate that.
I have another question.
Before you give the question, I don't know if you could hear what I said, but Leroy was talking, and then he just either stopped or it cut out or whatever. I couldn't hear anything he said after that. All I heard was him saying, in my experience with people growing up, it was generally people were saying, don't trust your doctor and stuff like that. And then it seemed like he was continuing, and then it cut off, and I didn't hear anything else. So, sorry to have to interrupt you, Anna, but I just wanted to make sure that what Leroy was saying wasn't lost, and I don't know if it was cut out for anyone else, and I don't know if there was a question you were asking Leroy that you wanted me to reply to. So, I just wanted to go back to Leroy and try that again, and then we'll get back to your other question.
I was just kind of stating what my understanding was in growing up, and that was all. That was the end of my talking. Go ahead, Anna.
Okay, great.
So there we have entering wedge part 1, entering wedge part 2, and I was just curious to know if you see a need for an entering wedge part 3.
Well, I don't know if it'll be called entering wedge part 3, but it would definitely be good to have something which advocates these principles and really lays it out more clearly. Now, Victor Hoddes, really in entering wedge part 2, there is a section where he really lays it out really clearly, and those statements are shocking, or they were shocking to me as a Davidian, and I'm sure they would be shocking to probably the majority of Davidians. But still, it could definitely be explained more fully. So, I guess what we'll have to do is just transcribe these studies and edit them, like removing parts like me talking about transcribing these studies, for example. And then maybe that will form some of the literature on this topic that can be of help to people. Okay, well, are there any other comments or questions from anyone?
I got a comment. Maybe we could read through entering wedges, and talk about them sometime. Health seems to be a major problem in the Adventist Church, and with all people, it's definitely a good entering wedge.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll end up ever going through like all of entering wedge part 1 and part 2 together on the calls, but we have gone through entering wedge part 2, at least the most relevant section for these principles. We have gone through that on the calls, and it's on the YouTube channel. So, yeah, Teresa was mentioning the title, Reforming Health, Reform, and Thinking. So, yeah, we definitely recommend that study. But, again, and hey, entering wedge 1 and 2 do have some good general health advice, and really the principles contained there are very, very good and very important. But of course, it's out of date information. I mean, they were written decades ago, and knowledge of health has advanced so much since then. So really, like if someone wanted some sort of primary resource in terms of learning about their health, entering wedge part 1 and 2 is far from what I would recommend because of its datedness. If they want to understand some of the principles related to health, then yes, absolutely. But yeah, anyway.
Like Anna said, maybe the world needs a more up-to-date version of it.
Well, something like that, yeah. So we are now at about an hour and 20 minutes into the meeting. Are there any last comments or questions? We want to wrap it up within these next 10 minutes or so, but if there's anything else from anyone, feel free to mention it.
I want to thank Sister Wisdom for the meeting, period.
Amen.
Hello.
Hey.
As you guys were talking about that, I was thinking, because Ellen White has had a bit of information. She talks about poisonous drugs in regards to cancer, and I'm just wondering if you might comment on that sometime, because it of course makes it seem like, as we compare it to maybe what usually happens in our modern day, it may not be the exact same, probably not the same types of drugs she's talking about, but she does make those comments about poisonous drugs and taking the poisonous drugs and the cancer going away for a while and then coming back actually stronger later. And I'm just saying, it just came to my mind. So
Sure, I'm happy to comment on that. Simply put, most drugs in the days of Ellen White were actually poisons and were very dangerous and are nothing like modern drugs. So the fact that the same word, drug, is used for what Ellen White was talking about and for modern drugs is just part of the development of language, but it is really two totally different things. And even if you compare Ellen White's statements with Victor Hoddeff's statements when it comes to drugs, they are very different. Victor Hoddeff condemned people promoting drugless medicine, and Ellen White seems to promote drugless medicine. But it's because they're talking about two different things. Again, and actually Harriet Hall brings this out in her series of lectures on science-based medicine, I think when talking about homeopathy. And she was talking about the origins of homeopathy and how it was celebrated as a safe alternative to taking drugs. And she pointed out, well, yeah, it was a safe alternative because most drugs at that time were poisons and were very dangerous. And so doing nothing to treat your disease, in other words, taking homeopathy, because homeopathy is basically nothing, doing nothing in the form of homeopathy, you had a better chance than taking drugs. And so, yeah, definitely drugs at that time were poisonous and not a good thing. This is just like coming out of the dark ages and all of that. Modern drugs are not at all like drugs in Ellen White's time. So yeah, there's definitely a big difference. I'm glad that you brought up the statements. All right. Well, I'm not hearing anyone else jumping at the opportunity to ask a question or make a comment or anything like that. Would anyone like to thank our Heavenly Family?
Heavenly Family, we just want to again praise you for the ample amount of information that you provide for us consistently. And we just thank you for your patience with some of us who are still learning, and I hope that and pray that you guide each and every one of us to really get the foundations of these principles and just really believe in truth with evidence, science-based evidence in some cases, and help us not to just believe in things without any proof. So help us to walk in this new way for most of us. In the name of Branch, he and she, I pray. Amen.
Amen.